All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Baruch Hashem, what a zechus it is to continue to learn Torah in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Bracha Strimber, for dedicating all the shurim in memory of her husband, Avraham ben Kalman, Eliezer, HaLevi, Bracha, and to thank Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating the shurim this month in the zechus of refuah sheleimah for Shulamis Susha. Thank you so much. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'dvaro. Amen. Perfect. Thank you. All right, I will say, so we are continuing Yemirat Hashem today in Daf Chof 20, Mesechus Nazir. We actually left off yesterday on the bottom of the test on the base, 3 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows: Katani ve'isha be'shamai omrim Nazir shloshim yom u'be'silo Nazir betchila. So if you remember again, the Mishnah introduced us to the concept that halacha l'maaseh, if someone became a Nazir in Chutz La'aretz, ultimately again when they come to Eretz Yisrael, they have to go ahead and re-observe some duration of their Nazirus. Now, how long of the Nazirus they have to re-observe is a machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says they only have to re-observe 30 days. Beis Hillel says they're obligated to re-observe the entire duration of the Nazirus. So the Gemara says as follows: so Beis Shammai omrim Nazir shloshim yom. Beis Shammai says when you come to Eretz Yisrael, you're obligated to go ahead and re-observe another 30 days. Beis Hillel omrim Nazir b'tchila. And Beis Hillel says that halacha l'maisa, you're obligated to re-observe the full term of the Nazirus. The Gemara says, so what are they arguing about? What is the nekudas hamachlokas? To which the Gemara says, the Beis Shammai savri, eretz ha'amim mishum gusha gazra laha. Shabbos is actually very interesting. Here's what we know from this particular idea, which is that Chutz La'aretz has a level of rabbinic tumah. The shaila just is, what is the nature of that tumah? Is it a tumah on the land, or is it a tumah on the airspace as well? So remember again, saying that it's a tumah on the airspace is even a higher form of tumah. So perhaps that is what they are arguing about. The Beis Shammai Sabri, Beis Shammai holds, Eretz Mishum Gusha. The Tumah of Chutz La'aretz is only a Tumah on the land itself, which is considered to be a lower form of Tumah, and therefore Beis Shammai only obligates you to observe another 30 days of Nazirus. Top of Chaf, Beis Hillel Sari, Beis Hillel holds, Mishum Avira Gazru Allah. Perhaps Beis Hillel says no, that Allah Lamaisa, actually the Tumah of Chutz La'aretz is actually a Tumah on the air of Chutz La'aretz itself, which is a higher form of tumah, which is why, again, it means like, and I was going to Beis Hillel, even just being in the airspace of Chutz La'aretz by definition gives one a sense of tumah, and therefore because it is a more stringent form of tumah, therefore halacha l'maisa, you would have to re-observe the entire duration of the Nazirus. To which the Gemara said, lo, everyone agrees that when the rabbis went ahead and said that Chutz La'aretz is tamei, it was a lower form of tumah, which only devolves upon the ground itself. But it is not a tumah on the airspace. So what's the machlokas? The Beis Shammai Savri Bistam Naziros Kansina, or Beis Hillel Kisavri Ki Kanisna Betchilas Nazir. So the Gemara says the truth is, it's really just a machlokas as what was the kanas. Here's what everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees that if you became a Nazir in Chutz La'aretz, that when you come to Eretz Yisrael, there's a kanas, there's a penalty. You have to re-observe some amount of the Nazirus, because at the end of the day, you were exposed to tumah. Now, what's the nature of the tumah in Chutz La'aretz? It's a rabbinic tumah that only devolves upon the earth itself, not upon the airspace. And therefore, the fundamental machlokes over here is a simple one. Beis Shammai says, therefore, the kanas is you have to re-observe 30 days. Beis Hillel holds the kanas is you have to re-observe the entire duration of the Nazirus. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry? Right, we're staying on Munbaz, which someone pointed out to me. I automatically assumed, right, the son that we're talking about in the Mishnah is Munbaz, but it's not true actually. I don't know, the Chevra pointed out yesterday after this year, Gemara Masechah Sukkah brings down the Heleni Amalka had multiple sons. So the truth is, the Mishnah just says about one of her sons going out to war. It doesn't mean that it was Munbaz. But again, it felt good saying Munbaz, being that we're staying on Munbaz Street. Isn't this Munbaz? It's Helemi Amalka, right? So let's say, listen to this. So the Mishnah told us about Helemi Amalka, where her son went out to war, and she took upon herself a neder nezirus in the zechus of her son coming back safely. So let's say, remember again, this is a machlokes now in the Mishnah. So she took, let's just review. She took an neder nezirus for 7 years, and then what ended up happening? She came to Eretz Yisrael, and it was there that she was told to observe. Right, Beis Hillel said ultimately that she has to go ahead and observe another 7 years. Then what ended up happening? At the end of that 7 years, she became Tameya, and therefore again had to observe another 7 years. So it turned out that she observed a total of 21 years in Nazirus. Pretty intense. To which the Gemara says, Ibailahu, Bishenitmes Va'aliba de Beishamai. So we'll say, so what happened over here? In other words, what's the story? Is the story over here? I'm sorry, one more piece. Rabbi Huda says she was only a Nazira for 14 years. So we'll say, the shaila is, what does it mean when Rabbi Huda says that? So Ibailu, Bishenitmes Va'aliba de Beishamai. We'll say, is it the pshat that she came to Eretz Yisrael? She really was only going to have to observe another 30 days, but then she became Tameya, and therefore had to go ahead and observe another 7 years, but it's in accordance with Beis Shammai. O Dilma, Bishalom Nitmes V'aliba de Beis Hillel, or maybe not. Maybe Halacha L'maisa again. Maybe Halacha L'maisa. Ultimately, she came to Eretz Yisrael, and she had to observe another 7 years in accordance with Beis Hillel. Well, what's the pshat? So Tashma. Also, she came back to Eretz Yisrael. V'horua Beis Hillel shetei nezira od sheva shanim achiros. She came back to Eretz Yisrael, and Beis Hillel paskin that she had to be a nezira for another 7 years. And if you think this is somebody case where she became Tameya in accordance to the position of Beis Shammai, ihachi Rabbi Huda Omer lo haisin nezira ela yud daled shana yud daled shana ushloshim yom mibayle. Both say, here's what's interesting. If indeed they were paskening for her in accordance with Beis Shammai, then what should the Mishnah have said? It should have said that halacha l'maisa, she came to Eretz Yisrael, she became Tameya. First of all, she came to Eretz Yisrael, she had to observe another 30 days in accordance with Beis Shammai, and then she became Tameya and had to observe another 7 years. The fact that it halacha l'maisa just said she had to observe another 7 years indicates to us that this was in fact in accordance with the position of Beis Hillel, who holds that halacha l'maisa, whenever you come back to Eretz Yisrael whenever you come to Eretz Yisrael after having made a neder nazirus in chutz la'aretz, you are obligated. Okay, thank you. You are obligated to go ahead and observe the entire duration again. Incredible. That supports this. Rabbi Yehuda said, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar Kra, Zos Toras HaNazir. This is the halach of the Nazir. HaTorah Amra, Kinitma B'yom Malos, Tein Lo Torah. So we've actually had this before. Rabbi Eliezer holds the halacha l'maisa. There's an interesting halacha, which is if you become Tameh on the last day of your Nazirus, at most you are capped at a 30-day obligatory repetitive period of Nazirus. Fine. So this brings us again to a close. How do we paskin? So the Rambam actually paskins like Beis Hillel. And first of all, I'll say, just going back a little bit, and this is pertinent for us, because unfortunately we're going back to Chutz La'aretz tonight. So there is a rabbinic tumah upon Chutz La'aretz, anywhere outside of Eretz Yisrael. That tumah is not on the airspace. That tumah is what we call mishum gusha. It's on the actual ground of Chutz La'aretz. Furthermore, the Rambam paskins like Beis Hillel, namely that if you go ahead and you take a neder nazirus in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, and then you come back to Eretz Yisrael, ultimately you have to re-observe the entire duration of that neder nazirus again. That's how the Rambam paskins like Beis Hillel. Good. Weiter Mishnah. Misha hayu shtei kidei edim mi'idoso. So it's a very interesting case here. There's a guy, we'll call him Ruvain. There are two groups of witnesses who are testifying about Ruvain. One group says, one group says that Ruvain took on a neder nazirus he took on 2 periods of nazirus. The other opinion says he took on 5 periods of nazirus. So what's the halacha? Beis Shammai omrim nechluka ha'edos ve'in ka nazirus. So we'll say, by the way, What's the guy doing in all of this? What's Reuven doing in all of this? Right? So you got one set of witnesses saying that Reuven took on 2 consecutive periods of Nazirus. One set of witnesses saying he took on 5 periods of Nazirus. So what's Reuven saying? What's Reuven saying? So I'll say the incredible thing is Reuven saying, I didn't take on anything. That's Rush brings out. I didn't take on anything. Right? But he's got Edus now. So what's the halacha? Beis Shammai says, look, essentially you have opposing groups of witnesses, they cancel each other out, and there's nothing more to talk about. The Beis Hillel says, Yesh bichlal chamesh shtayim shehei Nazir shtayim. Beis Hillel says, look, the truth is they're not fully contradicting each other. One saying he took on 2 periods of Nazirus, one saying he took on 5 periods of Nazirus. We'll say, what do they both agree on? That he took on 2. So therefore, again, Beis Shammai says he's going to be obligated in 2 periods of Nazirus. Sorry, Beis Hillel, thank you. Beis Hillel is going to be obligated in 2 periods of Nazirus because halacha l'maisa, that's what both groups agree upon. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Masnisin delo kiyai tano. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of the following Tana. Nisanya, Rabbi Shmuel beno, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omer. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Yochanan ben Baroka says, Lo nechleku b'sham Beis Hillel al shtei kitei edim, achas omeres shtayim va'achas omeres chamesh, sheyesh bichlal chamesh shtayim. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel aren't arguing in the following case. And you have 2 groups of witnesses. One says that Reuven took on 2 periods of Nazirus. One group says he took on 5. They're not arguing. Why they're not arguing? Sheyesh bichlal chamesh shtayim. Because they both say, again, logically, what they agree upon is he took on 2. He took on 2. I so what's the machlokes? Haman nechloku al kas echad. Al kas echad. I will say that the argument is the following case, where you have one group of witnesses, and in that one group of witnesses, echad omer shtayim, one witness says Reuven took on 2 periods of Nazirus, ve'echad omer chamesh, and one says Reuven took on 5 periods of Nazirus. So I will say it's interesting. So now Rabbi Shmuel of the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka is coming along and reframing the machlokes. He says when you're talking about 2 sets of witnesses, and one says Reuven took on 5 periods of Nazirus, one says Reuven took on 2 periods of Nazirus, we can reconcile that because they both agree that he took on at least 2. What's the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? The machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel ultimately again is in 1 edus. Okay, thank you. In 1 edus, right? In 1 edus, where you have 2 witnesses, and one says, what happens? What happens? Echad omer shtayim ve'echad omer chamesh. You have one set of witnesses, and in that one set of witnesses, witness A says Reuven took on 2 periods of Nazirus. Witness B says Reuven took on 5 periods of Nazirus. In that case, Beis Shammai omer nechlaka edusan. Beis Shammai says ultimately again their edus is split, and therefore they cancel each other out. Beis Hillel says no, they're not arguing. Yesh bichlal chamesh shtayim. Beis Hillel says no, they're not arguing because what would they both agree on? They would both agree on that Reuven is obligated in 2 periods of Nazirus. Amar Rav says, 1 second. Hakol modim b'mona. Rav says that halacha l'may said, no. We're talking about this idea over here. Halacha l'may, what we're talking about, literally modim means counting. Everyone agrees. Everyone say, what does this mean? Amar li Rav Chama li Rav Chisda, my kamar. What is Rav saying? Listen to this. Ilema echad omer chamesh v'lo shtayim, ve'echad omer shtayim v'lo chamesh, hakamach shi'ahadadi. So that says, 1 second. What are we talking about? If one witness is saying Reuven took on 5 periods of Nazirus and not 2, and one is saying he took on 2 periods and not 5, then what Rabbi say? They're actively contradicting each other. Elo echad omer achas ushtayim ve'echad omer shalosh arba chamesh. So this is very interesting. Right? The Gemara is suggesting, or Rav is suggesting, what are they saying? One witness is saying, one set of witnesses is saying, Reuven took on 1 and 2 periods of Nazirus, and the other one is saying Reuven took on 3, 4, and 5. That's how they're framing it. So, right, one group says Reuven took on 1 and 2, and then the other one says Reuven took on 3, 4, and 5. Amid Beis, to which the Gemara says, but what's the chiddush in that? Lamali hashta yesh lomar chamirta amar kilsa lo amar. So I will say this seems to be a little bit of a simpler case. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, again I will say, here's what's interesting. when you say, right, Reuven took on 1 and 2, and then the other group says Reuven took on 3, 4, and 5, when the group says Reuven took on 3, 4, and 5, are they contradicting the group that says 1 and 2? No. What are they doing? They're being Mosif. So to which the Gemara says, Amar, so the Gemara kills the Amar, Amri b'ma'arava, ein ha'kasha b'mona. That's why we both say, halacha l'maisa, when the group says 3 or 4, second group says 3 or 4, they're not contradicting the first group that's saying 1 or 2. Rather, what they're essentially is they're building on the first group. So we agree that Reuven took on 1 or 2. Halacha l'maisa, we're also adding on that he also took on 3, 4, and 5. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, they would not go ahead and contradict each other. So I both say, indeed, the Rambam Paskins like Beis Hillel, without the qualifications of the Gemara. Namely, again, that if you have Reuven saying, I'm not a Nazir. You have two sets of witnesses. One set of witnesses says, Reuven took on 2 periods of Nazirus. The other one says, Reuven took on 5 periods of Nazirus. What's the halacha? Reuven would be a Nazir for 2 periods of Nazirus. Why? Because the part where the two groups come together is on periods 1 and 2. The part where they argue on is 3, 4, and 5. So when it comes to 3, 4, and 5, essentially the testimonial units cancel each other out. But at least in terms of 1 and 2, halacha l'maisa, again, they agree. I will say, by the way, there's an incredible musar in this as well. What's the musar in everything? What's the incredible musar? So the incredible musar is the key to Achdus in Klal Yisrael is trying to figure out what we agree on and not what we disagree on. So we'll say, what do you have over here? You have Reuven, right? Reuven's in the middle of this. One set of witnesses says you took on 5 periods of Nazirus. Second set of witnesses says you took on 2 periods of Nazirus. So we have a choice. What's the choice? You can focus on periods of Nazirus 3, 4, and 5, which are the points of contention, the points of machlokis. And you can argue that, and you can keep on butting heads about that. Or halacha l'maisa, you can say, look, chevra, what do we agree on? We agree on periods 1 and 2, right? And therefore, again, let's focus on what we're again. I will say, if you think about it, it's the key to shalom bayis, it's the key to good relationships in our families, and it's the key to achdus and Klal Yisrael. There are always going to be things we disagree on, but we have to focus on the things in which we're able to have a meeting of the minds. It's actually this past week's parasha. One of my favorite ideas, my Rabbi told me this idea, one of my favorite ideas, the pasuk says, Vayichan Yisrael neged hahar. Klal Yisrael camped opposite the mountain. So Rashi HaKodesh is bothered by the obvious question, which is, it's singular. How should the pasuk have read? Vayachanu Yisrael neged hahar. They camped, plural. Why he camped, singular? So what does Rashi HaKodesh say? Ki ish echad b'lev echad. One people with one heart. So the Rebbe often mentions, it doesn't say ki ish echad b'deya echad. It doesn't say one people with one opinion, because lo haya v'lo yiyah. Klal Yisrael never had one opinion. Sometimes we think about this idea, that it used to be all of Klal Yisrael agreed on everything, and when Mashiach's going to come, we're all going to agree. Even the Melech HaMashiach could rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Melech HaMashiach could bring down the Beis HaMikdash from Shamayim. The one thing the Melech HaMashiach is going to be unable to accomplish is to get Klal Yisrael to agree on every single issue. And the beautiful part is, he doesn't need to. Whoever said we have to agree? We just have to learn how to disagree agreeably, right? We have to learn how to disagree b'shalom. We have to learn how to have multiple opinions, but still know how to foster an atmosphere of national harmony. That's what Rashi is saying. You could be ish echad b'lev echad. You could be one people with one heart, even with many, many different opinions. Rabbi, you'll say to yourself, how? Impossible. Here it is, Rabbi. The secret to Achdus, Nazir daf chaf. The secret to Achdus, Nazir daf chaf. Focus on what we agree on. Focus on what we're all on the same page about. Focus on the 2 periods of Nazirus, which everyone agrees on, and don't focus on the 3, 4, and 5, which ultimately are the sources of contention. Doesn't mean that the flashpoints aren't important. It doesn't mean that the other issues aren't important, but that doesn't have to be what we put all of our energy on. Focus on what brings us together, and Achdus will come. Hajjun Allah, Misham. I will say, Mazel Tov. Misham Harini Nazir. Let's do the Mishnah. Misham Harini Nazir. Person says, I'm a Nazir. Listen to this. We actually quoted this. We actually had this Mishnah already, which is very exciting. Always nice to come to a Mishnah that you saw quoted before. So Misham Harini Nazir. Person says, I'm a Nazir. And then what happens? Someone else comes along and says, me too. me too. So I'm sorry. I say Shama Chavera va'amar va'ani. Now we'll say actually in this case what's happening over here is Reuven says I'm a Nazir. Reuven says I'm a Nazir. What happens? Shimon hears that I'm a Nazir, right? Shimon hears and Shimon says me too. And then what happens? Levi hears and Levi says me too. So what's talacha? Kulam Nazirim. All of them are Nazirim. Hotra Harishon. So we'll say what happens if halacha l'maisa Reuven, the source Nazir, the original Nazir, does hataras nedarim. I will say, remember again, I mentioned this in yesterday's shir also, which is Nazirus is a neder. So because it's a neder, therefore what? You could do hataras nedarim, right? Again, if you go to a chacham, have your vow annulled, just like you can go ahead and a wife could go to her husband, or the husband could be made for the neder. So we'll say, now watch this. So in this case, Reuven made the neder Nazirus. Shimon heard and said, me too. Levi heard and said, me too. So what happened? So Hotra Arishon, if Reuven goes ahead and does hataras nedarim, so what happens? Hotra Kulon. So then remember again, Shimon and Levi also have their neder annulled. Why? Because since Shimon and Levi, since their nedarim ultimately again are built on Reuven's, if Reuven's is dissolved, theirs are dissolved as well. Hutra Acharon, they will say, what happens if Levi does hataras nedarim for his neder nazirus? So Acharon mutar v'kulan asur. So obviously again, that only affects Levi, not anyone else. Why? Because no one else's neder is predicated on Levi's. Therefore, again, Levi does hataras nedarim, that's fine. Amar harini nazir v'shama chavera v'amar pi kipiv v'sari kesara. We'll say similarly again. So Reuven is a nazir. Reuven says, I'm a nazir. Shimon hears this. And Shimon says, pi kipiv. My mouth should be like Reuven's mouth, and my hair should be like Reuven's hair. So we'll say, so what's talacha? Hare ze nazir. Ultimately, again, such a person is a Nazir. So we'll say it's the same thing as before. It's just in this case, Shimon is elaborating a little bit more. My mouth should be like his mouth, my hair should be like his hair. Hareini Nazir v'shama ishtar. Let's listen to this. Reuven says, I'm a Nazir. And what happens? Reuven's wife, Rachel, hears this. Va'amra va'ani. And Rachel says, I'm in, me too. So what's the halacha? Mefer es shela v'shelo kayim. Reuven could annul Rachel's Nazirus, right? Because that's his power as a husband. But obviously, again, he can't do anything. His own neder Nazirus remains intact. Harini Nazira. Rachel, listen to this. This is a flip case. Rachel says, I'm a Nazira. V'shama baila va'amar va'ani. And Reuven hears this. And what does Reuven say? Me too. Shabbos say, in this case, Eino Yachal Hafer. Fascinating. You know what I say, right? In this case, Reuven can't be mefer. He can't annul his wife's neder. Why not? Because if he annuls his wife's neder, then what? He ends up annulling his own neder as well. And of course, I will say the one thing you can never do is you can't annul your own nidarim. So, weiter, harini nazir, va'at. So we'll say, listen to this. If Reuven says, harini nazir, I'm a nazir, va'at, and you, Rachel, he says, Rachel, what right do we want? Va'amra amen. And she says, amen. Right? Mefer eshela v'shelo kayim. In that case, he could annul her neder, but his neder remains intact. In other words, the only time, well, actually, let's see it. Hareini nazira va'ata. If the opposite case, Rachel says, I'm a nazira. And she says to her husband, Reuven, and you, va'amar amen, and he said amen, in yachal hafer. They both say in that case, halacha l'maisa, he's not able to be made for it. Why is he not able to be made for it? Because halacha l'maisa, if he's made for her neder, then what ends up happening? He's made for his own as well. Both says just do two more lines. Yosef Reish Lakish kamei Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So Reish Lakish saying before Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya v'Yosef v'Kamar. Shabbos say. So we're focusing now on the first part of the Mishnah. What was the first part of the Mishnah? So remember, Reuven says, "I'm a Nazir." And what happens? Shimon hears him, and what does Shimon say? Vani, me too. And Levi hears, and he says, Vani, me too. So Reish Lakish qualifies this halacha, and he says as follows: Reish Lakish, Yosef kamed Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, v'Yosef v'Kamar, v'hu shetfisu kulan b'soch k'dei dibur. Now let's say, when does it work to say Vani? When does it work to say Vani? There has to be what we'll use the term verbal proximity. In other words, you have to say, or verbal immediacy, right? It has to be that you buy in the Va'ani takes place immediately, well, quote unquote, immediately, after the original articulation, what we call toch kedei dibor. V'kama toch kedei dibor. We'll say, what's toch kedei dibor? Kedei she'ilas shalom. The amount of time it takes to inquire about someone. The kama kedei she'ilas shalom. What's kedei she'ilas shalom? We'll say kedei she'omer shalom talmud l'rav. And we'll say the amount of time that it takes to say shalom alecha Rebbe Umori. So we'll say, so that's the amount, that's called toch kedei dibor, that's called verbal immediacy, the amount of time it takes to say, Shalom Aleichem, right? Hello, my Rebbe, my teacher, that's toch kedei dibor. That amount of time is considered to be verbal immediacy, which means that if you say something with that level of verbal immediacy, your statement is attached to the statement before. So we'll say, we know this halacha because it manifests itself in many different ways. So here, what we're saying is that halacha l'maisa, Reuven says, Hareini Nazir, Shimon says, Va'ani. The Va'ani of Shimon only works if what? If there's verbal immediacy, right? In other words, Reuven says Hareini Nazir at 8:15 in the morning, and Shimon says Va'ani at 9:15 in the morning. That's a meaningless statement. But Reuven says Hareini Nazir, right? And Shimon says within a few seconds, literally again, the amount of time it takes to say Shlomo Rabbi Mori Va'ani, then ultimately again that connects Shimon to that original statement of Reuven. We know this halacha Rabbi it doesn't just apply over here. Toch kedei dibur is a concept that we apply many different times. For example, Rabbi I pick up, let's say for example, you're on a Yarchei Kala, and maybe it's the last of the Yarchei Kala, and you're not sure if it's night, if it's day, like you're not sure what's going. You pick up a cup of coffee, and what happens? You say, Bracha Tashalom Kirmel Cholam Borei Minei Mizonos, because actually it's the core of your sustenance over the course of the week. Right? So it's like, so what happens? You realize your mistake. If you catch that quickly, you could change the suffix of the bracha to shahakol nihiyeh bidvaro. But again, that change only works if you make it toch kedei dibor. I will say, what's the muster of toch kedei dibor? But I will say, sometimes, if you live life with enough awareness doesn't always prevent you from making mistakes. But living life, like David Schwartz spoke about yesterday, by the Kiddush with Zehirus, living life with a sense of awareness, even if it doesn't prevent me from making the mistakes initially, at least it allows me to catch them in real time. And even if you can't prevent yourself from making the mistakes, if you can catch them in real time, it gives you the opportunity to turn things around. I will say, Shkoyach. We're going to do Mesilas Yesharim a little bit later on in the day, so everybody has a few moments now to eat breakfast, get backed up. Shkoyach.
Next 8:30 lobby back? Yes, please. Yeah.